Welcome to the Welsh Cricket Sofa, episode 1, our inaugural episode. It's something we've not done before, really, Cricket Wales or Glamorgan, and it's just something we wanted to try something a little bit different, just to appeal to our cricket network, and just offer something a little bit more that everybody can access in their own time. So wherever you are watching this across Wales, hopefully moving forwards, we want it to be of value. So. With me today I'm delighted to welcome Richard Almond and Mark O'Leary, and we thought we would start with coaching, really, being the first one. We are just coming into December, so winter programs are pretty much underway, and for the coaches up and down the country, we just wanted to kind of get the guys in the room and have a chat around coaching and see what's going on, really. So, guys. How's your winter started, Mark, with this Cardiff MCCU?
Yes, very good.
All right?
Firstly, thanks for having us, Matt. It's gone really well so far. We started the programme first week of October, and that'll lead up till the end of the first term, obviously the Christmas break, and then we'll start again in January.
Yeah. Nice. Rich, head of talent development, Glamorgan Academy, boys and girls, started all right?
Yeah, good. Busy winter so far. We started early part of November and had a good few weeks of hard training. So boys and girls are working hard.
Yeah, cool. What do those first few weeks look like for players coming back in? They've had a nice break, hopefully, from the summer. What are those first couple of weeks kind of encompass?
The first part of the winter, from an academy point of view, we really focus on the basics. And try and go back to basics for a lot of the players, and just examine all those fundamental things that they might have neglected during the season. And then there's a heavy focus pre-Christmas on athletic development, movement skills, and some fielding development as well. So busy time, but yeah, from a technical point of view, it's really just focusing on the basic fundamentals.
Yeah, cool. We're similar, really. Similar to what Rich is doing, going right back to the basics. I think if we talk about coaching generically, more so for the youngsters, I think they'll find it quite hard. And when I say youngsters, I mean 10, 11, 12, 15-year-olds. They'll find it quite difficult to go back to the technical side of things. But for me, I'm really passionate about that, and I think that's really important. Yeah. Just to reiterate what they've worked on previously, and just go back to what they do best, really.
Yeah. So club cricketers in particular, obviously the level you guys are at, the players are at a decent enough level coming into that winter. For a club player, very, as you say, very basic. Anything massively changes up and down that kind of standard and ability spectrum in terms of where they start in the winter?
I wouldn't say there's a massive change, but I think obviously the concentration skills of the youngsters is harder. Whereas the older players, they know how important it is, but with the youngsters, I suppose you've got to make it a bit more fun as well. That's what I would try and do personally.
Yeah, I certainly think the basic fundamentals apply across the game, whatever level you're playing at.
Definitely.
When the international teams have been here, you still see Joe Root and people like that doing underarm drills in the net. So if it's good enough for them, then it's good enough for any player at any level. And I think that's that holds itself. If you can nail those basics and get them right at the early part of the winter, it makes the rest of the winter and certainly into the summer then a lot easier.
Do you think that emphasis on basics gets lost a little bit across the way? You mentioned some of the best players in the world. We've seen it in England, a few of the guys, even at Glamorgan, they spend a lot of time on those simple drills.
I think there's a misconception in the modern game that those basics aren't important when you've got 20-20 cricket and T10 cricket and the 100 now and everything. People think that you just got to go out there and whack the ball. Well, the best players in those formats still have very good fundamentals. And they started playing all formats when they were under 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So, I think there's a bit of a misconception that you don't need those anymore in the modern game. I think we have probably neglected them a little bit too much in the modern times, and that's certainly something we're trying to do here at the club is to focus on those again across the pathway and make sure that our players are technically better than they have been in the recent past.
Yeah. I guess in terms of basics, without getting too into the nuts and bolts of it, batting, bowling, fielding, keeping maybe, Rich mentioned bits of athletic development. What strip it back real basics in terms of those three main disciplines, what would we be saying to club coaches? Focus on these. What are the key golden nuggets of basic skills that we want to be?
Yeah, for me, I think it goes right back. I'm pretty old school in those sorts of things, you know, grip stance, your movements.
Yeah.
If a player's successful, let them continue what they're doing. But if something is identified that keeps happening, player gets out so many ways, keeps hitting the ball in a certain area, obviously you've got to adapt that. Yeah. And just going back to Rich's point, obviously with the amount of cricket that's on TV and exposure of social media, the young players want to play those shots that reverse ramp shot or whatever you want to call it, but I think they should be exposed to that, but the fundamentals are really important to start with.
One of the key bits for me, I guess, was basic bits in terms of repeatability, kind of without going into batting, bowling, fielding, repeatability. We see glimpses of some of those basics coming through really nicely. I guess from my observations, it's about trying to replicate that over and over and over again without it being kind of overly monotonous and boring, but it's trying to build that little bit of consistency in young players.
Yeah, definitely. I think the game dictates that there is a huge amount of repetition, and you know, in practice, you in a perfect world want to make everything fun, but at times there has to be a bit of hard work, and there has to be some repetition from the players. And I think learning to concentrate during those periods sets the players in a good place for them moving forward. I mean, the longer game is all about concentration. Being able to bat for a day is tough. So, you know, if a young player can't concentrate for 5 minutes playing the same shot over and over again, we need to be able to teach them to do that. So that's certainly part of it. You know, and we try and do a combination of that, as well as then some fun, interesting stuff. So, yeah, there is an element of the boring, but I think the game dictates that you need that.
Sparky, you mentioned about making stuff fun. Basic stuff we can still make fun, but what besides being fun, or I guess how do you make it fun? What are some of the things that you yourself do, or coaches generally? How do we make those sessions to the point where kids are coming out of it beaming, smile in the face, want to come back next week? Well,
competition, isn't it? Kids, adults, everybody loves competition. One thing that I try and do, and I suppose it's more difficult if you're coaching a squad of 20 youngsters, 13 to 15-year-olds, is to, I suppose, give them responsibility and let them set up their competitions and ask them to come up with ways that they can make it fun. Yeah. I know you've spoken to me before when you were at Millfield. I'm not sure what it was called, but they used to have an afternoon where all the equipment would just go in the middle of the hall. Yeah, is that correct?
Yeah, we used to have an hour. It's almost like a freestyle hour where you just leave the kit there and just see what they get up to. Some will stand around for 20 minutes looking, what am I meant to be doing? Yeah. And then over time, things start to happen, and stuff that we wouldn't maybe think of as coaches would pop up, which is quite cool. You need time, I guess, and lots of time to have the capacity to do that. But I wouldn't expect some of our players necessarily to do that if they're not used to it. Yeah.
I suppose myself and Rich are quite lucky because the age we work with. I'm a big believer of saying to the players, you come to the session with what you want to get out of the session. Obviously, if it's something totally obscure, I'll intervene. But I think at a young age, as much fun as possible, and that's a really good example of how you can do that. That self-reliant bit around players coming to sessions with an idea of what they want to do, we should still be expecting that at club level. Coaches should be trying to encourage that, I think. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, we can encourage the players to start thinking like that. But I certainly also challenge the coaches to start thinking like that. You know, they need to come to sessions with an outcome in mind as well. And, you know, things go to plan sometimes and they don't go to plan other times. We've had plenty of those. But it's, you know, having a well-planned session also helps with the fun part as well. The kids pick up on the fact that everything is organised and running smoothly, and they'll enjoy a planned session a lot better. And I think, you know, I agree 100% with what Sparky said about competition. That's the best way to stimulate a session is just to introduce a bit of competition. But alongside that as well, I would urge some patience amongst the coaches. So those skills that you're trying to teach will generally break down under competition early on. So you need to go there back to the skill the next session probably, and then test it again and keep going back until it starts to show itself in that competition sort of pressurized environment, I suppose.
I guess that's a challenge in terms of, you're dead right, we've all seen that where we've worked on something, it looks great, and then it goes into that competition and as you say, it breaks down. Do you think we've got an important role in getting players to understand they want to win that competition, but actually success could be not necessarily, if you make it into a competition, sometimes the outcome is whether you finish first or last, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well you could have a player whose their weakness is a certain stroke, and they're in a competition, they lose the competition, but they've played that stroke really well in that time limit. And I think as coaches, it's difficult to then say to the player, you've lost the game, however, you know, your success rate or what you were trying to do was outstanding, and the reasons why. Just trying to get the balance, I suppose. Video analysis and whatever else you would use for that, but difficult one.
Rich, you kind of mentioned planning and coaches planning and how important that is. I think all coaches probably agree with that and know the importance of it. How does the kind of the winter evolve for you as a coach in terms of how you structure it, right from October, November time, which might be a bit early for kind of club level, but moving forwards to kind of April, May time, how does the content of that kind of shift around?
So like we talked about earlier, in terms of pre-Christmas, it's physical development, fielding, some basic stuff, fairly low intensity sessions from that side of things. So no real pace on the ball. The bowlers doing a lot of drill work, a lot of conditioning work around their actions without actually running in and bowling, flat out. So we're giving their bodies a time to recover as well. And then as we move into the period after Christmas, we'll do some more specific technical, tactical work around playing quick bowling, playing spin bowling. And then as we get closer to the season, we'll start looking at some game scenario stuff. So we start really nailing down the game plan work and the scenario work, and get them match ready as much as possible before they start playing games.
Cool. Yours pretty similar?
Yes, pretty similar. I suppose and really good example of coaches work with age groups, a squad of 31 players. I'm the only coach. It's quite difficult to manage. And that's one of the biggest things that I mentioned earlier, was trying to empower those players and give them responsibility. It's quite difficult for me to keep on top of those players, as in what you're going to work on this week, what you do last week, which I've got an idea because I know the player. And yeah, similar to Rich, it's really basic at the moment. One of my biggest difficulties would be the transition of new players coming in from being at school and getting stuck in a routine of doing certain things, but understanding that when we play the first class games or the county games, they could be bowling for 21 overs in a day. But it's just trying to manage and educate them, really, which I think that education word can be used from young age right through to senior players, is as a coach trying to educate players.
I guess it's stripping back a level under that. It's, say club cricketers probably aren't at the athletic development type stage and bits around that. It's trying to maybe just segment parts of the winter to kind of really delve into the detail of stuff. And as you say, it's trying to start really basic and build it up. I don't know whether, I'm sure we've all seen it, coaches, that we've all been guilty of it probably in the past, where we spend a bit of time on something and we move on and we rush and we want to get to the fun stuff, we want to get to the game awareness stuff.
Certainly. I that's what I mentioned earlier about being patient with the players. If you need to spend a bit more time on the technical work, do that. I tend to take a longer term view on player development. So, if you're working with 10, 11, 12-year-olds, it's not a 1 month, 1 year project. It's a 10-year project. So, the coaches working at that level are working on a small part of a huge project. And if it means you have to work on a couple of things for a long period of time, that's fine. That's the way it is. So making sure you do nail what you're trying to work on before you move on is important.
Can I just come in on that, Matt? Obviously, with my role teaching and working as a coach educator, when coaches prepare their plans, their coaching plans,
Yep.
the temptation is that if you've got a 20-minute plan or half an hour plan, is you have to nail that 20 minutes or half an hour. I've got to do this. But just going back to what Rich was talking about, if it's going well or not so well, you may have to skip it, go back to it, continue what you're doing.
I think that's good. That's the good coaches recognise where you've got to kind of drop in, and you've got to either, as you say, you've got to keep with it, you've got to evolve it. I can't think of a single session I've ever coached where it's gone according exactly. I probably put that on a bit of paper.
And that would include warm-ups before a game. Yeah. So temptation is, and we've all been guilty, I have been, is you may see a field injury and say, right, I'm doing that today because that looks good. When do you stop it? How long does it go on for? Yeah, so I think as a coach, we just need to be a bit mindful of not just getting everything in if you've got a plan for...
It's really interesting, the bit you say around when do you stop it, when do you recognise when to intervene, I guess, whether that's a warm-up, whether that's you're on the bowling machine, whether you're doing throwdowns to a player. The temptation is always to, if you spot something, is to jump in and see it and go, right, let's sort that out. And is that the way we want to build up self-reliant players and players that can develop that awareness? What's our thoughts on that? Is, again, at a club level type thing, we almost want to let the players have a bit of, I don't know if I'd use the word failure, but experience that and see if they can work it out a bit for themselves. Yeah,
players are smarter than you think, and quite often give them credit for. If you question a player after a false delivery or false shot, quite often they know themselves what they've done wrong, so there's no need to dive in. But certainly I'd hesitate more often than not in terms of diving straight in, especially if it's someone that you haven't necessarily worked that much with before. You need to get to know the player, you need to get to know their technique, the way they play, before you start diving in. I've always found that's the hardest part of coaching sometimes is not to say anything, and that's something that all coaches I'm sure will find tough, but need to be able to do.
It's hard, isn't it? Because if you've got an hour with a player that you're not going to see him again for a week or 2 weeks, you want to. Yeah. You almost feel like you've got to say stuff to make it have that value, doesn't it? But
I think, again, just going back to the Rich's point as well, that player becomes reliant on you. So if you bowl a bad ball or no ball, they know, oh, well, Mark's going to come and tell me anyway. So it's, and we're all guilty of it. I certainly have been trying to pass your knowledge over, as much as you can, but there's a time and a place for it, which is really important.
Yeah. I guess that kind of links on that this might be one thing that makes a player stand out in the winter is the ability to kind of be that self-reliance. But more generally, is there anything, what makes a player stand out for you over the winter? If you're either in a session, observing a session, what makes you kind of sit up and go, oh, they're looking really good right now. What is that? What do they need to do to kind of be doing the right type of things in your eyes?
It's really difficult to judge indoors in the winter, but you just want to see players who are engaged in your session as much as possible. You want to see players over the winter who are progressing and developing their games, and you can actually see that. And the crucial thing for me through the winter period, especially towards the back end of the winter, is attitude. And if the players have still got that hunger and desire that they had at the start of the winter when they first pick up the bat, that's a real positive sign. The biggest determinator whether a player goes on to play at the highest level for me is the mental side of things, and the player's attitude and inner drive, motivation to work hard to get things done themselves is a crucial thing. So seeing players that are self-starters, not just sitting around doing nothing, when they get an opportunity to actually go in and do something themselves, those are the ones that tend to fly.
Yeah, full package for me. Yeah. Well, as Rich mentioned, motivation or motivated, wanting to learn, everything early at the sessions.
The little things.
The little things, I think, and as a coach, that just gives you the vibe that one, they want to develop, and two, they're here for the right reasons.
We've all had the player that nods along and doesn't say much,
of course.
You feel like you're giving them that a lot of kind of us talking to them, and I guess the players that are often really fun to work with, the ones that actually come back and challenge a little bit in the right way and kind of ask questions and are doing all of that.
And obviously if you're working with a younger age, as a coach, you've got more responsibility to enforce that or give them their feedback. As an older age, that you know and they know. I think you can be more honest and open conversations with them and be quite upfront with their progress.
Definitely. How does it's an interesting dynamic, because obviously we've got a decent boys pathway across the country. The girls game is going in a frighteningly exciting direction in terms of numbers and the standard that we're starting to see across England and Wales. How does you obviously involved with Western Storm? They won, didn't they, in the successful Western Storm competition this year. Any differences massively in terms of coaching girls, coaching females, coaching to boys?
I'll say this on camera. It's probably one of the best experiences I've ever had in my coaching career is working with the Western Storm. They're just the girls seem to have that inner drive, and they question quite a lot. They want to learn, they want to develop, and that was a big thing for me to take away. I'm not saying that the males don't do that, but I'm not saying I was surprised, but I was, it was the fact of getting up tomorrow morning saying, I'm really looking forward to working with this player because they're engaging with you, and they were all the same. Yeah, really, really exciting.
Yeah, cool. Anything from our girls? We've got some cracking girls on the junior academy and academy.
Say the game largely is very similar in terms of the techniques and things like that. And I agree 100% with Mark. The girls tend to be a lot more conscientious when it comes to their training, and they do want to learn a lot and will tend to listen a lot harder than the boys do sometimes. But the game is largely, there's some subtle differences, but largely the techniques will be the same. There's a bit more pace off the ball in the women's game as opposed to the boys in the men's game, where you're trying to impart pace onto the ball, and that then dictates from a batting point of view. You probably want to see a little bit more in terms of cross-batted shots with the women's game, but other than that, the techniques are very similar.
Agree.
Let's just come back to fielding, because we kind of skimmed over it a little bit earlier. It's such a big part of the game now. We see it still in Test cricket, but in some of the franchise stuff and the limited overs stuff. It's some of the things that the players are pulling off is frighteningly good. In terms of again how a coach at club level or higher up than that, is it a case of little and often, or kind of organising fielding and just really spending loads and loads of time on fielding? There's still that kind of traditional bit that fielding comes last a lot of the time, and that's probably still quite current in a lot of places. How do you guys kind of incorporate your fielding into your culture, I guess, if that's the right phrase?
Yeah, with the MCCU lads, we're quite lucky because they work in small groups. We might have 4 in a group, so we can use some of the hall and we can do the drills. Again, responsibility for the player. They'll come to me and ask what they've got to work on, but I will then have my areas of development for them from the previous years. If you're talking about younger age groups, when you've got a group of 20, 25 players, which is quite difficult, something that I've done previously, and it sometimes goes against all the grains of coaching, is basically have small teams on in one go. So you could have 7 or 8 players on for 5 minutes.
You did that with me once upon a time when I coached me. I remember that.
Well, the others are off.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, they can observe, they can score. There's loads you can do, and then swap them around. There's competitions you can do with that. But I've seen so many practices where you've got 20 people in a hall standing around. Yeah. They stood around when they're not involved, but
they're engaged still in the exercise and the activity.
But when they're on and there's small groups of them, they're actually working probably harder, more productive than what they would do.
And it brings that competitive element maybe back to it, as you say, in terms of making it fun a little bit. Yeah, cool. I guess in terms of challenges, we've all had a lot, coaching is full of challenges, as everybody who's been involved in it will testify to. What are, in your experiences, whether it's again at club level or academy level or MCCU level, what's some of the kind of key challenges that coaches tend to face, or something that you've kind of come across that tend to be quite common across the board?
It's a difficult question, that, but
yeah, I don't know how long we've got.
There's any number of challenges when you walk into a session every day. There's going to be some challenges. I guess the biggest one is being able to adapt to your players to get them to improve and develop. Every player is going to be different, and sometimes something that has worked for a player in the past doesn't work for the player you're working with now, and that can be frustrating at times and challenging. But it can also be an opportunity and an exciting opportunity for development from a coaching point of view as well. If you can find a way to get through to that player, it's very rewarding. So I guess that's the big challenge, is being able to adapt your coaching methods to all the different personalities and types you have in your session.
Yeah, cool, definitely. You got anything?
Yeah, a couple for me actually.
Yeah.
Facilities, one, and sometimes when facilities not available, sessions are cancelled. But fitness is a great opportunity to do fitness during that time. You can do fielding. We're nearly in December here, and it's dark outside, but the temperature's not cold.
Yeah.
So there's ways of working around that. Another one is the amount of coaches that the player may work with. So as we know, you've got your county coach or your club coach. Then you could have a player who's having a one-to-one on a weekend or whatever it is, and it's just that clash of, I suppose, what the player's being told. And I'm not saying it's all bad or it's all good, but it's just trying to get the balance.
The player's got a task there to kind of, if you're 12 or 13, that's a really hard process to go through, where you've got to try and, you're trying to be receptive and listen to lots of things, and I guess the challenge is there is how much variance is there in some of that.
And even when I was younger, when I was being coached, I can remember one coach telling me one thing and to do one thing and the other one not to, but it should be all about the player really. It's quite a difficult one to manage, I think. Yeah,
let's come back to the facility one, because it's something I think club coaches will definitely relate to, whether someone's overran their booking in a sports hall and they can't get in, or there's no nets, for example. In our programme, we have to sometimes move out of supply gardens and use a sports hall that doesn't have nets, for example. You've got some traction with benches, and you've been doing all sorts the last couple of years in terms of being really creative around that. And is it a case of, I'm a believer, I guess, is that we've gone back, we've talked about basics and the basic techniques of stuff. Often that doesn't need it. It would be great to have a world-leading facility in our back garden, but often you can still get a lot of that stuff done in a pretty basic space. Yeah,
well, you got a bit of space here. You could do some stuff some work in here. It's a difficult one, but those drills that I do, there's more probably that fall flat on their face than are successful, and they've got to be for the right reasons and for what the player wants to do. But you're right in saying that, you could have an old tennis court as long as it was safe to do some work on and go out and wear a jacket in the rain, use some plastic balls. Who says we can't practice in the rain? It's not very fair on the coaches, but we play.
I remember growing up in South Africa, some of our best ever fielding sessions were when the nets were too wet and it was pouring down and we were sliding around the outfield in the mud, and you can still do it. It's still fun, and actually from a fun enjoyment point of view, like you say, as a coach you probably won't enjoy it, but the kids will have an absolute ball.
I guess they play rugby in it, they play football in it, wouldn't they? So why not cricket?
Just talking, I suppose, about some of the difficulties we have, is obviously one's expense, and two is players being exposed to other sports. Huge believer of that, more so at a young age. But it's just managing. I suppose it's hard for parents, isn't it? They got football, rugby one night, swimming the next night, and then cricket. So I suppose, as a coach, ensuring that they're doing as many sports as possible, but also understanding what sports they are doing and what they're gaining from that.
And somewhere to find a rest, probably.
For example, they could have had football practice last night where they did fitness, and then you've got a session tonight and you're doing fitness, and it's just, I suppose, communication would be another job for the coach to do.
Yeah, cool. Lastly, before we get on to some kind of questions that we've received kind of via social media and various bits, in terms of practical drills, I think we've covered a few bits around competition. Have you got any go-to drills that spring to mind that you would use if someone said, right, you've got 20 kids there right now, what would you do? Have you got anything that you could share for other coaches to kind of go, oh yeah, I could use that could go straight into my coaching kind of toolkit for the winter when I get going?
Yeah, a few actually. Batting, quite a good one would be a sort of snakes and ladders. So you've got a whiteboard, roll the dice, number comes up, move 4, whatever that is, you've got to play a sweep shot next shot. If you don't, you go down the snake or up the ladder, whichever it is. Little simple things like that.
Yeah.
Another one for batting would be, I can't remember where I got this one from, it wasn't made up from myself, it was 21, so first to 21 on the machine or slinging. If the batter doesn't score, as in once a field's set, the feeder gets 3 points.
Yeah.
If the batter does score, they get 1 point, it's the first 21.
Oh, there you go.
Quite simple, competitive edge.
Yeah.
And in fielding, anything to do with catch it ramps, competitions.
Yeah.
15 catches, 5 at the back, 5 in the middle, 5 at the front. If you drop it, you start again. Just real simple competition.
There's some pretty cool stuff. We take a lot of stuff fielding basic-wise, I guess, from baseball, don't we, these days, in terms of ball in hand, the way you're picking it up, getting into the kind of the throwing type position. So coaches, YouTube is a decent resource. I still use YouTube quite a lot whenever I'm kind of...
Yeah, massively.
I'm trying to think what drills I've actually used myself that I've come up with. There's not many. It would be more kind of pinching bits from other things and seeing things that obviously relate to what you're trying to do. Yeah,
I mean, that's part of the skill of coaching, is to steal as much as you can from other coaches.
Yeah, it's really important.
Every time you go around, to games, watching games, involved in games, I'm always looking at the opposition coaches, see what drills they're doing. Is there anything different that might work?
Yeah.
There's no shame in pinching drills.
Yeah.
Just on the back of what Mark said around snakes and ladders, we quite often here in the academy do a bingo version of that. So, bowlers coming up with 5 or 6 different deliveries they have to execute, and batters playing different shots, and first one to bingo wins the game. So there's lots of different things you can come up with.
Cool. I'll have to steal a few of them as well.
I think from a coaching perspective, whether you're coaching club cricket or elite first class cricket, whatever, I think that you've got to try them, and don't be afraid for them to fail.
Yeah.
And talk with the player, speak with the player, ask them, oh, did you enjoy that? And you'll know if they've enjoyed it or not. And I think as a coach, we are sometimes not by the book, but this has to work. No, it hasn't.
Okay, so we'll get into some questions that we received from social media. We had a few from Twitter, we had a few from Facebook, so thanks to everyone who chucked a question in. We'll try and get through some of them. I'll start with Howell John. We know Howell, he's at Penturk Cricket Club, has done a great job with the All-Stars in particular, I believe. And Howell asked, kind of, given the mental side of sport and cricket really, how much time should we spend on the mental approach?
It's largely dictated by the age and stage of development of the player, but it's certainly something that a coach can drip feed in from a fairly young age. I mean, we've got players on our junior academy now who are 12 years old, and we're starting to introduce some basic mental skills around things like concentration. Resilience is a big one in cricket because it's a game of failure, really. So getting them to understand that those basic concepts at an early age is important, and then obviously as you go through.
He says how you kind of have that alter as you get older.
So as we go through the academy program, it becomes more individual then around the players' personality types and how their sort of performance states, are dictated to by those personality types, and the sports psychologists will work with them around optimizing their methods to get the best out of them, and dealing with pressure, things like that. So we do spend a bit of time on it, but a lot of it is done practically in a cricket situation. So you're not sacrificing tactical time. It's about trying to replicate those match situations in the nets, and then try and practice the mental side of it as well. To cope. So I guess at a club level, there's no fault or nothing wrong with their coaches starting to introduce some basic chat around the mental side of the game.
Yeah.
Cool.
So something I would use is pressure testing.
Yeah.
And basically you would introduce a practice or a drill, and then you would put a target on that So basically they're practicing and they're under a bit of pressure at the same time. So again
you can see where
sports site would come to that.
Cool. Here's one from your club actually. Andrew Palmer, Sudbrook Cricket Club. This is a good one. When should a youth player focus specifically on batting or bowling? So when do you make that call between going, I'm a batter or I'm a bowler, or maybe both, hopefully?
Is there a time? That's what I would ask. Personally, I'm a big believer of exposing the player to as much as possible, and that may be, you may have a young spin bowler, age 13, who has a growth spurt and becomes 6'4" and can end up bowling quick, but is still a spin bowler. I think it's really important to be exposed to everything as much as possible. Everything as much as possible. My nephew Scott, for example, without bringing up, he's nearly 6'4" and he's bowled leg spin. How do we not know that he can bowl fast? He probably can't, but you don't know, do you?
Until you have a go.
That would be, I think, expose them as much as possible to it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, cricket by nature is a very late specialisation sport, so I would keep an open mind. I mean, we've had a few examples on our staff here over the last few years where Jack Murphy came through the academy as a 6'5" left arm seamer and ended up opening the batting in first class cricket and not bowling. Jeremy Lawler came through as an off spinning all rounder. Ended his career sadly last year, but as a seam bowling all rounder. There's been numerous cases where players have changed really late on. So
I think it said Rory Burns was batting 11 in age group cricket at kind of 16. So that just goes to show, doesn't it?
The famous example is Kevin Peterson over here, who was an off spinner in South Africa and came over here and ended up being one of the best batters ever. So I would really keep an open mind and encourage the young players to have a go at everything.
Is that difficult sometimes? Because if a player, let's say, is a player trying to get into a higher stage of a pathway, and the coach kind of says, what do you do? And say we all kind of hear that answer of, I do a bit of both. He might bowl one week, and then what's he doing keeping down there? Sometimes that gets frowned upon actually, because people think, why aren't they focusing and dedicating enough time on that one bit? So it's trying to find that balance, isn't it, between how much time do you dedicate towards it, and then how much do you keep your doors open?
I think the tendency is to neglect what you're not good at or what the child doesn't like. So again, the answer to, I suppose, Darren's question would be that if you've got somebody who likes batting all the time and their bowling's okay, as a coach, you've just got to try and work out how can we make sure that they want to do more bowling. And again, that would be a fun element to me, a bit of competition. Not neglecting, I suppose.
Certainly a three-dimensional cricketer nowadays is very attractive. So the more skills they have to their bow, the better.
Yeah. And any selection, if you've got a choice of two players, you're going to look at, they're a better fielder or they can bowl a bit as well. So
all-round package, definitely. Wonderful. We'll go one more, and again another Sudbrook member, Darren Lloyd, and Darren's got a lad in the pathway who we know pretty well as well. Darren says, with a great summer of cricket behind us, the question of Steve Smith and his technique is very much a talking point. With his unique and successful method of batting, will this have an effect on coaching methods and ideas moving the game forward?
I hope it does. Yeah, I think that every individual is different. He's very successful at what he does, and it's quite interesting. Even some of my lads I work with, they do the Steve Smith leave, and we know what it's like. You see things on TV, not quite as bad as him, but you can see it creeping in. You see things on TV, and that's how players develop. I remember when I was younger, Shane Warne, Wacky Eunice, all the players used to replicate them in the net. I'm not saying you would bowl like them, but I think it's really important. However, the basics are the...
I was going to say the basics. Smith isn't the only example where Chanderpool, and there's lots of other examples at the top end where it's very unorthodox. When you strip it back, all those basics are still there, even when you're scooping it over the keeper's head.
Yeah, and I think that's the crucial thing is, the techniques can look very different, but when you actually look at the basic fundamentals of it, there's some pretty good stuff that Steve Smith does. His head position is brilliant. He plays with an unbelievably straight bat. He does get himself reasonably side on at point of release and is fairly orthodox. So there's a lot of stuff that is pretty orthodox in his technique amongst all the quirkiness. You mentioned Chanderpaul, people like that as well. They generally get themselves into pretty simple, basic positions. And when you look at we talk about the fundamentals we spoke earlier. For me, across all three disciplines, your head position is crucial. So that dictates then your balance, which is critical, and some alignment factors, which in batting would allow your bat to come through straight is important as well. And if you look at those things, you can have a range of players that look completely different. But if those basic things are all there, that's when you're going to do all right. And those players, it's fine to leave them alone.
There's a thing at the moment, I suppose. Joe Root would be the same with his initial movement, back foot, front foot coming back. Quite a few players are replicating that. If it works for you, it's fine. And that's what I would always say to my players. If you're successful, you're scoring runs, taking wickets, you're not getting injured, continue it. But if there's a trait of getting out constantly a certain way, well, obviously you'd have to address the technique. And I think that would apply to youngsters as well.
Yeah. We certainly don't want to create clones. There's room for a huge amount of individualism.
Yeah, definitely. Another one we've got is somebody at club level is asking, we're at a club that actively integrates our youth players into senior cricket. That's obviously good to hear. Have you any suggestions on how to manage those youngsters' expectations through any loss in form? That's quite a good question.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, cricket is a game of failure, so being resilient as a young player is crucial, and learning to deal with failure is a vital part of the game. I guess the way to manage that is through some positive self-talk from those senior players. And then crucially, for me, it's around preparation. So if the player is practicing enough, is playing really well in nets, is being talked to by coaches, by parents, by fellow players in terms of, you're playing well, you should be confident, and you're going into the game with that confidence, you're giving yourself the best chance to perform. And then accepting when things don't go your way, reflecting on the reasons why and getting that right is important as well. So looking at the reasons why you fail in ways that you can control, and that usually then comes back to some preparation and some work-ons before you play in the next game. So a bit of a cyclical approach in terms of prepare, play, review, and back to prepare helps in terms of maintaining confidence levels and giving the players the best chance to perform.
It's just that security, isn't it, for a young player who's stepping into that senior club environment? It's knowing that you've maybe got a run of games and nobody's going to kind of come down on you if you've kind of not scored 100 in 6 weeks. It's it's that little bit of security.
Everybody likes to win, and I think from a senior perspective, as Rich said, is giving that player confidence. But I think whether you're a coach or a player, a player could give advice to the young player who's not being successful, and not just constantly winning. We're quite unfortunate that our sport's long, and teenagers especially lose interest if they're not involved, they're not performing. So my advice would be, and something I when I was younger, I bowled leg spin, not great, but I knew I was going to bowl my allocated overs, whatever the situation was, playing third team cricket to start with, and that's just backing and supporting that young performer, I suppose.
I guess that's what kills you as well, is if you get, I say don't promised is the right word, but when you kind of, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and then when it gets a bit tough and under pressure, they go away from that. That probably doesn't help a young player's confidence, does it? So it's been, I guess, being realistic with what you're saying to that player, and then actually what you are saying, make sure you kind of deliver on that a little bit.
Yes, definitely. And again, it goes back to fun. And years ago, we used to go into the bar at a young age, and you talk to the old pro or the old timer, and they would talk cricket, and that's gone. So it could be the responsibility of the coach or the players, which I'm sure there are players that are going to see this, is to speak with the youngsters during the game. And give them that reassurance and say, look, you didn't bowl very well today, but next week you'll bowl your 8 overs, or you bowl really well today. Can you give me the reasons why? And just a reassurance and confidence, as Rich mentioned, I think.
Awesome. Well, that's our questions kind of done. Gents, thank you very much for your input and for being involved in that. Thanks again to everybody for their questions. Hope it's been useful to a point, and we'll see you for episode 2.